Thank you. I'm going to take part 2, and I am home. And I grew up over here. I grew up on Richmond, and we moved to Phillipsport off of Moyers. And now I live in Bella Vista, so I'm still a neighbor. So greetings, neighbor. My name is Milam, Crime Prevention Manager for the City of Richmond. I report to the Chief, and so I report to Chief Simmons, and I know Chief Simmons had been preparing all week for this, and so he obviously did not expect what we have experienced today. If you guys want more information, there's a press release that's out on the city website about what happened, and they're doing an investigation now. If he can, he'll try to pop in here tonight, but I would definitely suggest that he come back because one of the things he told me was a top priority is exactly what Sergeant Ramos just talked about, is restoring the neighborhood beat officer system to the neighborhoods. For those of you who remember, like way back to the Magnus era and before, and Arto and I were talking about it, and Bill Broderick, it was very important to have a beat officer who you know. And so we are going to move back to a system of trying to keep beat officers connected to neighborhood councils, so you don't have to re-explain your issues to a new person. There still is going to be changeover, but we want to try to keep that continuity there. So it's somebody you know, somebody you're familiar with and connect with. A couple things I wanted to share with you tonight on some of the upcoming things that are happening with RPD, and it's just fortuitous that I happen to be working with Chief Simmons on, some of his priorities, and I wanted to share a few with you, is staffing. As you heard Sergeant talk about, staffing is really premium right now for the Richmond Police Department. We went through a period, if you think back to, for those people who were around in 2008 and 2009, during the tenure of Chief Magnus, of really trying to build up staffing within the Richmond Police Department. And if you were around during then, you remember that we did have a large number of homicides and violent crime were happening. It wasn't uncommon for us to have 47 in a single year. And so, you can imagine our homicide detectives trying to respond to solving 47 homicides, and you can't kind of get one under the belt before another one occurred. We were fortunately able to kind of build a model that was recognized nationally by the Department of Justice, and we built up staffing to almost 200. I think we were actually authorized for over 200 officers at one point in time. And then 2020 happened, right? And we hit the pandemic. And there was a move in 2020 really to look at alternative responses to policing, which of course we do support. I am probably the social service part of RPD in some ways. Under crime prevention, I do neighborhood watch. We work with businesses, merchants, schools. We work with neighborhood councils. We work on community events. We do public education. And then I have a second hat. My second hat is we work with unhoused folks. So we've had a core social service team that has worked with the city for the last 8 years, servicing people who are unhoused and offering services before we do abatement. So we definitely support those kinds of models. But there was a question of, how do we allocate budget expenditures, and how do those change if we want to change our model? And if you listen to, there was a Zoom last night that I believe Councilmember Bonner held. One of the things that Chief French said as she was departing is the way that we went about that made it difficult for some officers to want to stay here. And so we saw an exodus of some of our officers. We also saw an exodus of people who wanted to go into law enforcement in general. We saw retirements happen. So our staffing shrank until one point, I think we were around maybe 100, right, sworn? That's half. just to put that in perspective. And so really what Chief Simmons wants to focus on moving forward is how do we rebuild the department? It takes a while to train a new police officer, to recruit and train someone and have them go through all of the process and to get them trained so they're ready to get out on the streets and actually answer your calls for service. And so one of the things that Chief Simmons is really focusing on is how can we bring lateral officers in who have experience, but also are connected to the community. We don't want anybody else's leftovers. We want people who really understand community policing. But we want people who have the skills that we can get up and running in the community a lot quicker through the process. So those are some of the things he's going to be focusing on, aggressively trying to recruit and retain and attract officers to the city so that we can, again, have that support. Now, people might ask, well, what does staffing have to do with community policing? Aren't these two things like polar opposites? And I would say, how can you have community policing if you have no police? You can't. You know, what I do with crime prevention is work to build relationships with neighborhoods and their beat officer. Well, if we don't have enough officers to be able to come to your neighborhood meeting, if we don't have officers that can work with you on some of the things that you can do, if we don't have the kind of patrol that we need to kind of follow up on some of the issues that come up in this neighborhood, then we don't have community policing because we don't have the staffing. And so it's critical that we have that, you know, that staffing is available. So he's going to be working a lot on trying to make Richmond a full-service police department. The other thing that happened during the pandemic when we lost officers is that a lot of our specialty units, so things like narcotics, you know, regulatory ended up going somewhere else. You know, units like property crimes that were kind of reduced and combined. Traffic unit was reduced. A lot of these things that are important to neighbors. Anybody not concerned about traffic? Everywhere I go, that's like the biggest issue in the city is like, what's going on with the traffic, you know, near me? So all those things that are quality of life issues that make it safer and better for you to live in the neighborhood where you live and you invest and you pay taxes, those are the kinds of things that unfortunately kind of went away. And also we lost some units that dealt with investigative crimes. Well, it's one thing to have enough patrol officers to be able to respond to your calls for service. It's another thing to have somebody be able to investigate so they can solve those crimes, right? And work with the district attorney's office on things like human trafficking, robberies, burglaries, auto thefts, things that plague us all that we get concerned about. So building up that staffing is one of the #1 things that he has in addition to improving and advancing training. The other thing is quality of life. I think for those of us who live here, it's important to me when I drive down the street as a resident that works for the city is, if I see a mattress on the street, I'm going to report it. If I see that there's a tent or an encampment somewhere, I'm going to report it. Your president is great at calling me and say, hey, this is a problem, Michelle. Can you please have officers respond to X, Y, and Z because it's important. So we want to get back to those quality of life issues, and I think the last time I came here, I shared with you that we have a city attorney that's dedicated to quality of life issues, so nuisance houses. I can't say which one, but there's one in your area that they're working on, trying to, you know, handle with code enforcement. So these are some of the things we want to bring back, so we have extra tools. If there's that drug house, if there's that house that's always having the issues, that we can focus on some of those things and we can get some results for the neighbors about some of the concerns that people have. And we want to kind of address things early with the right combination of tools. The third thing that he really wanted us to focus on is understanding that public safety is a partnership. We don't have to be enemies, right, with social services. And I think that's the thing. It's like, well, either it's RPD or it's the Rock. I can tell you as somebody who has worked with the core team for the last 8 years and core services 1,400 people individually a year, every year in the city of Richmond who might be unhoused and need services. If you've never been to an encampment, you've never driven up, you've never talked to someone, you've never walked through the process of someone who might not have been housed for years, trying to get them to take shelter options, which they may or may not like, or figuring those things out. It takes a lot of work and effort to be able to do that. And I think we have to see public safety as a continuum, is that there will be calls that our community crisis response, our ROC team that's coming on board will take. There's going to be calls that CORE is going to take, and those are needed. There are going to be calls that we'll co-respond with. So like the mental health engagement team, we have an officer assigned as a collateral to that team. That is high-level calls that come in that don't go to A3 where, you know, we have mental health crises. We used to really fund that. We don't as much anymore. But those are co-responder models where an officer goes out with a clinician. And then there are calls that officers will take. So we want to do that, but we also want to have the resources to do investigation. So that's the quality of life pieces that we want to kind of focus on. Finally, I think we want to focus on, again, solving crime and increasing accountability, you know, to our residents. It's really important for him that there be follow-up for cases that are filed. I can tell you, you probably know, property crimes, if you're a property crime sergeant, what happens? You come in on Monday morning, what do you have? you have a whole stack of reports that are on your desk, right, that you have to go through. And being able to have that properly staffed so that, you know, someone is following up on your case is really important. And also the use of smart technology. So you probably heard recently that we suspended flock service, and the reason that that was suspended is because Chief Simmons discovered that there might have been a loophole in flock, and they were concerned about information being exposed. And so he took immediate action, and he said, I'm going to suspend our use of flock until we kind of figure this out with flock executives and make sure that the data for Richmond residents is protected and it's not shared in a way that would be detrimental to city policy or to our immigrant community. But flock is a very helpful tool as well. But we want to evaluate these kinds of technologies on a regular basis so that you're aware of what's going on. So I think those are some of the things that he'll probably talk more to you about. I don't want to steal his thunder on any of those things, but I just happen to be going over and taking notes as we work with him on some of these things, and he shared some of these things with us. I think you'll find as a new chief, he's going to be very accessible. He really wants to move us back to the community policing model. And, you know, it's going to be important for you to build a relationship, not just with him, but with Sergeant Ramos and your beat officer. Because, you know, at the end of the day, the chief is handling 15 different things. But, you know, who's responding to the calls for service? The chief's role is to be able to make sure there's enough staff to be able to respond to you and take care of the things that the neighborhood needs to have taken care of. So I definitely encourage you, once your beat officer is assigned, to get to know him or her. And I know Sergeant Ramos is a great sergeant. Even though he's a new sergeant, I've always enjoyed working with him. He's very conscientious. And so if you call him, he will respond and he will answer and follow up. And so that's all I got.
Thank you. I did want to mention, I'm the chair of the Richmond Neighborhood Coordinating Council. We have 33 neighborhood councils in the city of Richmond, and there's about 22, 24 that are active. I was on the committee that got to interview the applicants for the chief of police, and Chief Simmons won by a landslide. It was a no-brainer. I actually felt bad for the other applicants, but you know, it's what it is. But he did give us a presentation at the RNCC meeting a couple Mondays ago, and all the neighborhood councils were extremely enthusiastic with his presentation. And a lot of the stuff that Michelle just mentioned was mentioned, and including that there are 4 new lateral officers and 4 in the queue waiting to be trained and put out there. And one of the issues that I saw that is we used to have 200 officers, but we dipped under 100. And so our PD is clawing to get back, and they're working very hard to get services back up for the residents, and it's greatly appreciated because we need them. But in the interim, what has happened is that they've lost some investigative units, and I was wondering if you could talk about that.
Yes, we have lost some investigative units, and as I talked about, you know, some of these units were collapsed. So do we have a traffic unit? Yes, but it's severely reduced from what we would need to be able to serve the public. You know, other things like narcotics. We used to have a special investigative unit that actually identified people who were involved in shootings and other things like that, so that we can culminate that with, you know, investigations and work with other cities and other partners to really focus on the violent crime. We don't have that anymore. And part of the reason we don't have such units is because of staffing. You know, we really had to make some decisions on how we did that. We felt it was important that when you call 911, somebody shows up. And so we did front load patrol, but there still is, you know, a hole in investigations and following up on some of these crimes. Our investigators and detectives are very hardworking. They work hard to make sure that the crimes are resolved, but the crime keeps on happening and it's outpacing, you know, the pace of the amount of staff that we have. So our goal is to get back to that. The chief is saying, I think 25 is his goal for this year, to try to bring in 25 new sworn officers. And so we're working with our personnel and training unit to try to make sure that that happens. But those investigative units, yes, did shrink or collapse, or some of them went away, or some of them were transferred. Like we used to have regulatory, and regulatory is now housed in code enforcement, so we don't do that anymore. But we still do services with code enforcement in the regulatory unit, and some of those things like smoke shops, and to tobacco retail ordinances, the things that people, are concerned about. So those are some of the things that have gone away, and we hope definitely to improve. Number one, I think, is traffic. We have to get back to the traffic unit. Unfortunately, one of our premier traffic officers who worked really hard had a fatal heart attack a couple months ago. And, we talked about this last night, it's a stressful thing, and when you lose one person to anything, to an injury, to whatever the situation might be, it makes it harder for us to be able to serve. So we're working really hard to try to rebuild that, and that's part of the chief's goal, is to get to that number of 25.
Thank you. Any questions?
I was going to just add to that. When I first started here and I was upstairs as a detective, we had 45 detectives.
Yep.
Right now, I think we have 13 detectives. 14. So that shows you how much depleted our investigative unit is. We only have one dedicated traffic officer. When I was here, when we had those 45 detectives, there was 6 dedicated traffic officers, which did tickets all day long and then responded to basically serious crashes. So right now we only have one. That's all we have. So that just kind of shows you where we're at.
And you lost an officer to Hercules.
That's true.
Came back.
That's true.
That's true.
Good evening. Thank you, Michelle and Officer Ramos. Appreciate you. The name is Ahmad Anderson, and one of the things that I think is commendable amongst several is that, as you mentioned, the department's working with you, but being quite resourceful, if you will, thinking of other avenues not only to retain, but also bring in folks that are lateral, who have experience and have a relationship with the community. Seeing the both of you who are from this community is very encouraging. I guess the concern is that from the outside, and as we see it, there's been such an adversarial relationship with the council from defunding and not recognizing the importance of resources for the day-to-day, but the importance of social services. It seems that it needs to be a three-pronged approach. One, staffing measures need to be met to be able to address the day-to-day. As you just mentioned, Officer Ramos, the fact that your detectives that are not available to be able to find them, to follow up the crime. I'm proud to say that we've reduced our murders in our city, but the other issue that you mentioned continued. Something is, Mr. Godsey said in response to you was, it's almost as it's business as usual, and we need to be able to address those as well. That impacts people coming here to live, living here, staying here, businesses, and the revenue we need. What can we do as a community to support that, to encourage the council to reach a level of balance to support us in our neighborhoods and be able to have you all respond to us when we need you?
Well, I always get in trouble because I am a little too honest, but that's the only way I can be. I'm my grandmother's child. So I can say, as residents, you have a right to share what your concerns and your priorities are with your council members. Budget time comes, people make decisions about what they're going to do, and it's important for you to call, to write, to show up to meetings, to advocate specifically, to whoever your representative is. You have council districts, so you have representatives, and share what your concerns are if that's something that concerns you. I think the other thing you said, Ahmad, that I think is really important is that we don't have to be adversarial. I'm a big believer that, it's better to have a win-win than a lose-lose. Yeah. And when we end up fighting amongst each other, this is nothing that I haven't shared with council members specifically or people in the community. Nobody wins out of that. I think if we look at public safety as a continuum, yeah, you need social services. Sometimes you're going to need somebody who's going to be able to sit there with somebody for an hour and talk to them, or a couple hours. Sometimes it takes 4 or 5 hours. You also need to be able to have a police department that can respond to neighborhood calls for service where police stalls are happening. And you need to be able to have an investigative unit that can follow up on those crimes. That's common sense public safety. We don't have to be at odds with one another. I think for that to work, it's a best practice model. It's worked in other places, and Richmond can lead the curve. So that would be my suggestion.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions before we let our PD going? Oh, and by the way, if you have issues with the houseless or the homeless, however you like to refer to them, Michelle would be your contact person. So
I'm going to leave my cards or pass my cards around, so if anybody wants to, they can feel free to contact me. And email is always great, so thank you.
how about a round of applause for both?